to that extent, we show that our party is not in fear of this like the pro-government parties are.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you think about the libertarians who didn't show up and who were trying to shut the convention down? And again, I could understand if there's a libertarian out there who's elderly or who has a pre-existing health problem. Sure, you don't want to take any chances. But what about the libertarians that aren't in those categories and who tried to stop the convention from happening or were putting out all this fear to not come here?
And there are hundreds of those, hundreds of them. And I mean, they battled in every venue they could find, even on Facebook, libertarian pages, constantly criticizing this convention, calling us irresponsible and even madmen, crazy, mentally ill. But I think all in all, it's been a success. I'd have to say that. We stood relatively strong, those of us who came. And I think in the future, those of us who didn't come will regret it, because it was a great time.
Yeah, and they've been taking our temperature every day as we walk into the hotel, and I haven't had a temperature, and obviously I guess you haven't either, or else they wouldn't have let us in the hotel.
I don't know of anyone who's had a temperature.
Yeah, and as far as Orlando goes, Orlando, the county, it's in Orange County, Florida, has a population of over 1,393,000 people, and there's been, according to the government's own numbers, like 16,000 people with COVID in this county, but only 77 died. So that's 77 people out of over 1.3 million who've died in Orange County, Florida. So why are people freaking out over this? Especially honestly, libertarians.
We have had flu, we've had polio, we've had scarlet fever. Pandemics and epidemics are not unusual in Western history and the history of the United States. The Spanish flu, we've had so many of these things. What this is, the COVID scare of 2020, has to be the most overrated example of one of these things in history. There was a flu outbreak just 2 years ago that killed 60 to 80,000 Americans. Mm-hmm. And even now, you get to think about the overreaction. Governors ordering these shutdowns and lockdowns, people just driven to unemployment by the millions, and yet even now the death rate from this COVID, the most dreaded virus that any of us recall in recent years, the death rate is still not that much greater than common flu, or it's very similar.
Now, back in your home state of Montana, I know somebody who lives in Montana. They were telling me that most of the people in Montana have not been wearing masks.
It's hard. Now, I think it's gone up and down, frankly. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of skeptics out there that just aren't going to go for it. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of not wearing masks. But then you see the media, the mainstream media, I call it the government-supported media, because it's been caught so frequently they just relay the government's hysteria. So yeah, with the rise of that, there has been more people, even in places like Montana, that are very worried, and it makes people nervous, a little bit scared. But by and large, I think rural America is not as cowed as urban America.
Yeah, and I was in Nebraska recently, and I would say in Nebraska only maybe 15 or 20% of the people were wearing masks. I actually came here from Nebraska. Now I'm a Pennsylvania delegate, but I just happened to be in Nebraska working for 3 weeks. And, in Nebraska, only maybe 15 or 20% of the people were wearing masks. Now, when I left Pennsylvania, I'd say like 95% of the people were wearing masks. Now, I haven't seen any evidence that there's lots of people dropping dead in Nebraska. In fact, I've seen the exact opposite evidence. And, Omaha is a pretty large city. It's got like over 465,000 people. Lots of people from all over the country pass through Nebraska on the highways. And yet there's no mass deaths going on in Nebraska. So doesn't that just kind of show you how, ridiculous this is?
Well, in Montana, it's the same way. There might have been, I think even to this date, there have been under 100 deaths in the entire state. Mm-hmm. Every single person is a statistic. We need to worry about every person, especially the vulnerable. But honestly, this has been one of the greatest exaggerations, I think, in any period of American history. I just shake my head when I think about it. Of course, we all need to worry about such things. We shouldn't take it lightly. But frankly, you look at the statistics, it just does not warrant the outrageous impositions that have been placed on us. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think this convention actually was very important. We had to have it to make a stand. Now, the Libertarian Party is divided, but I think those of us who came and stood did the right thing, and it's time to, stick to our principles and show that we just don't. We are people who are very, very intellectual in terms of what we read up on this. Okay, we do our research, and there was nothing that warranted us canceling the convention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the reasons I came here, was to take a stand against this nonsense that's going on. And what do you think about the whole forced vaccination agenda? With Bill Gates and all that. Do you have any thoughts on?
I'll tell you what, everyone should shudder at this. Ron Paul tells a story frequently that when he was first elected to the U.S. Congress as a Republican back in the late 1970s or maybe 1980. When he first got there, the Republican leadership said, "Hey, we're going to force everyone to take a swine flu vaccine, and we need you to be the point man on this because you're a doctor." Ron Paul said, "Wait a minute, I'm not sure I support that." He said, "No, I don't support that bill at all." Well, the bill passed. They vaccinated millions of Americans for the swine flu. The vaccine ended up killing and permanently disabling more Americans than the actual swine flu did. And Ron Paul to this day goes around telling that story all the time.
Yeah, another thing about the vaccinations is like if you're really convinced that the vaccinations worked, then what's it to you if somebody else doesn't take one? Because then that person may get sick and die. But if you think the vaccination is so great, then you won't. So shouldn't it be an individual choice?
Absolutely, and keep in mind, what we should all hope for is that our community gets herd immunity. That's what the best possible, most rational, most reasonable outcome. The most logical strategy is to make sure that the healthy of us have already been exposed to this virus, because that creates herd immunity. And once a population reaches a particular level where 60% or 50 or 70 or whatever, it might vary from situation to situation, but when a high proportion of the population has already had it and developed antibodies and immunities to this disease, then we are all better for it because the disease can't travel anywhere. The dumbest thing that you can do as a society is shut down, lock up, stay indoors, become weak, lose your immune strength, and then when the government allows you to come out of your house, well, you are even weaker than you started. The dumbest public policy in history.
Yeah, I mean, I read that during the American Revolution there was a smallpox outbreak, but people still went out and fought the revolution. So it kind of shows you how pathetic weak the population is today. That this COVID thing, which is statistically not even really killing that many people, and people hide out in their houses for weeks and weeks and weeks, and due to all this fear mongering and brainwashing from the government. Yep. But anyway, hey, are you able? I understand you were involved in the Bundy case. Are you able to give any kind of quick synopsis on that?
I worked on the Bundy defense teams both in Oregon and in Nevada.
How did you get involved in that?
Well, I initially got involved with the Ryan Bundy defense team in Oregon. They were charged with conspiracy to impede federal agents by occupying the Malheur Wildlife Refuge in Oregon. And the accusation was that they were preventing federal officers from doing their duties and doing their jobs. There was a defense to that, which was these guys were doing a combination of things. They were protesting. They were making a stand for the Constitution as they understood it. And there was even a strong argument that they were trying to undertake adverse possession and restore that allegedly federal land to where it belonged to, in their opinion, the county. Okay, so some people call that the greatest trial in American history. I was right there, front row seat.
What was the outcome?
Not guilty on every count.
All right.
Beat them, and then after that, of course, the Bundys were being prosecuted in the U.S. District Court of Nevada, the federal courts. So I went down there and also worked with the Clive and Bundy team, and the Brian Bundy's teams as well, and. Down there, they were charged with, having this armed standoff, quote unquote, with the Bureau of Land Management over the roundup of some cattle from some desert cattle ranges down there. And there was a big, it really was sort of you could even call it a standoff in the year 2014. And the feds waited 2 years before they filed an indictment. And they accused 19 men of multiple felonies.
Now, were those the people who showed up as a part of the standoff? Like they were, there were people on horseback and people with guns and stuff. How you say they only went after 19 of those people?
Yeah, it was it was almost a lottery. It was hit and miss in terms of whether you were lucky enough to not be indicted. Many people were there with guns who were not indicted. Many people who were there without guns who were indicted. And it's sort of strange how the federal prosecutors picked and chose who they went after.
Do you think they tried to go after people who they thought were easier targets, maybe because of an economic status, or maybe they had like other things on their record or something, or maybe some were more politically vocal than others? So you think it was kind of arbitrary then?
They went after the guys, well, it's a combination. They went after the Bundy family, of course, Cliven, Ammon, Ryan, Mel, and Dave Bundy. And in addition to that, these militia guys. The scarier you looked, by and large, the more likely you got indicted.
Okay.
So one lesson for everyone who's watching this: don't look scary. So, a guy walks around with black leather gloves and big weapons, and he gets indicted, but a guy wearing a Hawaiian shirt and something else, a cowboy hat, doesn't get indicted, doing the same exact things. It is it really shows you a lot. And the juries do respond to those things. And also the couple guys who got the worst outcomes, Greg Burleson is one of them. He's a guy that posted a lot on social media, lots of scary, tough guy type talk on social media. He's doing 68 years in federal prison right now.
Wow, that's terrible. That is terrible. Okay, well, I guess we should close it up here. Do you have anything you want to plug before we go? A website or anything? Or?
My big project recently is LysanderSpoonerUniversity.com.
Oh, I've heard about that. Can you? What is that exactly?
Well, it's named after the great the 19th century writer in Massachusetts, Lysander Spooner, great anti-government writer and activist.
No treason, the Constitution of no authority. That's
right.
What he wrote that. Yeah.
And he wrote Trial by Jury, a lot of great things. So we're trying to basically launch an actual university named after this great. You could call him an anti-government hero of the 1800s. And right now it's mostly a website and a blog, a libertarian type blog. But ultimately I want to turn it into an actual brick and mortar type university down the road.
That's a great idea. Okay, well, anything else you have a personal website?
My personal website, rogerroots.com, that needs some updating. Let me think. I'm also working on another website I'm trying to develop called antigovernmentnews.com, and I hope to have that launched very soon. With I want to have more and more news outlets from an anti-government perspective. Most of the news that we get is pro-government. Frequently, it's secretly paid for by government. And we don't even realize it.
Yeah, and it came out a long time ago. The CIA infiltrated the media with Operation Mockingbird, and a lot of the people involved in the media, they're connected to groups that control the government, and so the mainstream media is biased. Now, that's not to say that everything reported is false, but there's a lot of spin put on it. And I talked to a guy. I don't know if you know who Jim Marrs is, the late conspiracy researcher, and I met him a couple times, and he told me that they can't control what every reporter does, but they can control the distribution of the stories and which stories get more publicity than others.
And they get the authority of mainstream, so-called news behind them. And frequently, like you said, whenever there's an investigation, we find that government is secretly paying for a lot of this stuff.
So so folks, if anybody out there watching this, don't believe everything you hear or read in the mainstream news media. Look to alternative sources and think for yourself. But anyway, okay, well, thanks a lot. And I guess you're heading back to Montana now from this convention. So maybe we'll get a chance to catch up with you later. Okay, thanks. All right, bye.